How many days after post-op?
You can take it after maybe 3 days. What's your opinion? Yeah, because post-op. You have to enter the post-op values, no? So, I mean, for uniformity, I mean, in many you can take even on day 1, but for uniformity you can just keep, post-op day 3.
No, he's talking about the final
value. That's what he's talking about. That when will you take the post-op readings?
How to avoid parallax in aligning?
In aligning. Okay.
So actually, suppose the patient is tilting his head to up.
Yeah, actually for slit lamp method that he was showing regarding marking, no?
Alignment.
Intraoperative. See, if the eye is tilted upwards like this, you can very well, straighten up the eye with the use of forceps, right? And this pallex also arises, when your marks are not perfectly 180 degree apart. This because of your vertical misalignment. When you are totally at 180 degree apart, you are not vertically misaligned, you won't have this problem. So that's where this toric calculator, this also comes into play.
Even pre-op when we are marking, I think it's always better to see the other eye also, so that your head is not tilted like this or like this. So it should be uniform on the other side also, then only you understand the head is straight and still.
So vertical alignment, misalignment will be there. Marking also. Yeah. It will not be 0, 180. Sometimes it will be 1 millimeter down or half millimeter up. And that's resulting in post-op.
Yeah, that also, and moreover, if you can make out, your nasal marking is little bit down, and temporal is fine, then you, mark it in reference to the temporal marking, not the nasal one. Okay. Or if your nasal is down, sure that no, temporal one is perfect, it's fine.
How do you re-dilate and post-op? Suppose you have a...
We have talked, we have a talk, Dr. Vidushi will be...
I take K readings with IL Master and then handheld auto K and manual. But every time I get different readings, either axis as well as power. So then which reading I shall take? Or I shall take average of all 3 readings, or what shall I do?
Well, if the person who is taking the reading is expert, then I would go by the manual. And this is what is recommended also, in spite of having all the machines. Right, and you take 3 readings, and if there is slight difference, you just see that it may not be different, but if it's slightly different, maybe 0.25 or something, then you just have to see. You just have to see whether, you can take, that's also one way, that if it's say 0.5 or 0.25 different, then I think taking an average is not going to change much.
No, I think just an add-on to what Rajesh was saying, if everything being normal in all patients, in terms of the number of points measured, because all this is a function of the number of points measured. IOL Master takes about 8 to 10 points. IOL Lenstar takes 16 points. If you have a topographer, that will take about 2,000 to 4,000 points, depending on the topographer. So if you want perfect numbers, if the tear film is good, I would prefer a topographer. But if you have access to an IOL Master and it agrees within 5 degrees, usually it will not be allotted. Within 5 degrees, I don't think it makes a big difference in terms of what you want to do. But auto K, manual K, and if you have an IOL Master, I would actually prefer to take the manual K and see if it matches the IOL Master.
Yeah, Dr.
Morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to touch upon and share my thoughts about multifocal toric IOLs. It's not something that is established in the sense that I think we had only 3 or 4 papers in the literature on multifocal torics so far. I have no financial interest in any of the materials mentioned in this presentation. It's already been highlighted that almost 1/3 of all our patients who come for cataract surgery have pre-existing astigmatism. And these days, modern cataract surgery has become another form of refractive surgeries. Our patients expect a lot more. Long gone are the days when they just wanted good distance vision without having to resort to glasses. They also want good near vision. And these days, they also want excellent intermediate vision which allows them to use computers and do other things. So patients' expectations have gone a lot higher, and we need to meet those expectations. So it's with that view in mind that people have started coming out with multifocal torics. So basically, you are getting rid of the presbyopia, you're getting rid of the cataract, you're getting rid of the corneal astigmatism as well. And quite a few of my patients are patients with refractive lens exchange. There's no cataract, they have high astigmatism, they are past 45 years of age, and they want something done. So more and more I'm coming across patients wanting refractive lens exchange, in which I'm using this particular kind of lens. It's been mentioned that children over 12 years of age can also have these lens implants. Compared to monofocal torics, where you can get away with one diopter or more than slightly less than one diopter of astigmatism, but here with multifocals, you have to be even more precise. Even one diopter of astigmatism can compromise with the visual benefits of a multifocal, basically because there is division of light energy into near and focus distance, and that causes problem with contrast sensitivity. So if the multifocal is reducing the contrast sensitivity, and on top of that you have a residual astigmatism, it's going to compromise the results of your surgery. This is the lens implant that I've been using for the last 3 years. It's basically a refractive multifocal lens called Lentis M+. I have no financial interest in this lens. And based on this model, they have come out with a toric version, which I've been using in a few of my patients. It is rotational asymmetry. That means the reading segment, which is inferiorly placed, has to be placed vertically. So the orientation of the lens is vertical always. It has hydrophilic material, but has a coating of hydrophobic, so it's a kind of hybrid composition, which gives you best of both the worlds. A biconvex aspheric surface, which basically implies you got to center it perfectly, otherwise you will have problems. And it's got customized toric surface. It doesn't add on to your pre-existing spherical aberrations like Tecnis lenses and other lenses, and it doesn't depend on the size of the pupil. Though with very small pupils, we do have a problem with this lens. And as I said, it has a 3D near segment compared to 3.75 or 4 diopters with some of the other lenses. This is the shape of the lens. As you can see, the marks of the axis, where the axis has to be placed in relation to the limbus, are already there. So you just have to insert this lens vertically via superior incision, or if you're going by temporal incision, you need to move it superiorly so that the near segment is inferior and the axis marks are aligned with your marking preoperatively. It fits in very nicely with all kinds of capsular bag diameters because it's got an overall diameter of 11 millimeters, and because it's placed vertically, it fits very snugly with the capsular bag, even in high myopes, where the capsular bag diameter can be a little higher. So there is less chance of it moving or misalignment, and because it's a plate haptic, it is less likely to move anyway. So it is a lot more stable in terms of its misalignment. Since I've shifted over from C-loop to plate haptic version, I've not had a single case in which I've had to go back and reposition the lens. There are no, the images don't jump when you look from near to the distant segment. And compared to some of the diffractive models, I've not had one case in which we've had permanent night vision problems like glare, halos, or starbursts. And we can use this in younger patients. Even if the pupil is very large, as you see in young high myopes, we can still use this lens. More than anything, even in low illumination levels, it gives you very good contrast sensitivity because not much of the light is being lost when conversion from distance to near focus. So how do we go about preparing the patient when we are considering this lens implant? Of course, the usual examination of the eyes with measurements of all the parameters like uncorrected near vision, distance vision. Counseling is the most important thing in these patients because you need a lot more chair time. You need to prepare these patients accordingly, make sure that you've dampened down their expectations, and also you made them prepared for any touch-up or other procedures which you may have to undertake later on. I usually use Aladdin for my auto-reflection, auto-keratometry, and corneal topography because it gives me both now. I've shifted over from other keratometers to Aladdin, which is made by Topcon. Again, no financial interest. And you can also use any of the other things. Ultrasonic biometry, especially the contact type, if you are using that, do not use any multifocals, do not use any multifocal torics because you will never get it right. Because your excellent measurements and all those things are going to be very imprecise and the results will not be very predictable. And if you are using an immersion contact biometry, immersion ultrasonic biometry, warn the patient that patient may not get the optimum result. I always do an OCT in this kind of lens because these are premier implant lenses. They pay a lot more, so you need to be even more precise. So it's my routine. If you have OCT, if you not, at least do a proper fundus evaluation with dilated pupils. Quite a few of these patients are in elderly age group, have dry eye syndrome. I always pre-treat them with lubricants before I do my keratometry because I've found that using lubricants pre-operatively can change the keratometry and make it a lot more precise and accurate. And I always start these patients on topical non-steroidals to prevent any post-operative cystoid macular edema, even though the incidence is a lot less than it used to be. Amblyopia. Conventional wisdom is don't use it for amblyope. I have used it for mild amblyopes, 612 in the worst eye, and I've had good results. But you have to warn these patients that the binocular vision compared to uniocular vision may be slightly worse, but they still do very well. And of course, I've already mentioned about the possible things that can go wrong. So if you are preparing them with these things, you know that they are aware that they may need a touch-up procedure, whichever it is. They are better prepared, and in case things don't go right, they don't complain too much. Large angle kappa, which you see in quite a few hyperopes. This has been the bugbear of multifocal lens implants, especially when it causes a lot more night vision problems. So if you have a large angle kappa, you can still use this particular lens implant, but you need to rotate the near segment slightly towards the nasal side, like we do with our ordinary multifocals or varifocals or bifocal lenses. And if you have access to Tecnis multifocal toric, that would be an ideal lens if you have a very large angle kappa. Because I use this lens, I have to go to their online calculator, and it's a very user-friendly software program. And as we've already mentioned about surgically induced astigmatism, if you have IOL master, put in 30 to 50 patients, put in their K values pre-op and post-op, using the same lens implant, same incision, and you will get your own surgically induced astigmatism, rather than depending on which keratome you are using. That's 2.2 will give you, 2.4 will give you 0.4. That's all right, but it's not very precise. It's always better to have your own surgically induced astigmatism based on your own individual technique. Again, you're using a constant because you need a given spherical equivalent. So when you do IOL master on these patients or whatever optical biometry you're using, you have to have your own A constant. And it's always better to either use the ULIP website A constant for this particular lens, or you individualize your A constant by using your own surgeon's fudge factor, and that's what I do. And this gives me a more accurate outcome. We talked about K values just now. I've shifted on to Aladdin because it gives you 1,000 measurements, takes 2 concentric circles, and gives you a lot more central corneal diameter to take values from. So it's a lot more precise than IOL master, which gives you very, very small area in the center of the cornea, which may not correspond to your visual axis. So this works better for me at least, but of course manual K is the gold standard. And there are situations when your K values vary between, we also discussed that very briefly. If they are different from auto K, I normally take an average of the two and compare it with the refractive cell. There are situations when your K values, auto K or whatever, vary with your refractive K values. So what might be the reason? The reason might be patient may be having tilted optic disc syndrome, where you have additional astigmatism caused by the infero-nasal scleral ectasia, which you see in these patients. So you need to be careful. If you have refractive cylinder more than K, toric multifocal or toric IOLs are not going to correct the whole of astigmatism. You have to warn the patient that patient may need maybe LRIs or astigmatic keratotomy post-operatively once the patient has stabilized. I normally take axis of the cylinder from auto-K or topography. That's more accurate than IOL master K readings. And my aim is to usually is very hyperopic eyes, aim for minus 0.25 and emmetropia in others. Again, depending on which axial length you have to use an appropriate formula, and that will give you a lot more predictable result compared to SRKT in all the patients. It doesn't work like that. Based on your axial length values, you need to use an appropriate formula. This is the online calculation chart. You need to enter your values, which we already talked about in detail. I used to use this, but I've shifted on to slit lamp because I found slit lamp is a lot more accurate than using a bubble marker. You get a printout, a transparency, when they send you the lens. So you put it on the screen like arthropods do when they have their scans on the projector screen. So you put it there. You cannot go wrong because right in front of you near the microscope, you know where your toric axis is. So you mark your axis 0, 180, 90, and the toric IOL axis with your pen, or you can scratch the surface, and make sure that this is in front of you when you are doing it. It also tells you which incision you have taken, what is your surgically induced astigmatism. It's all built into this calculation. You don't have to do anything. My technique is to use always a superior incision because it's a plate haptic lens. Rotating from a temporal to superior is a nightmare, a plate haptic lens. So I always use a superior incision. I know my SIA. I go from the chop, just insert the lens. Usually I don't have to rotate much. Usual technique of phacoemulsification, we already covered that. Just remember that your surgically induced astigmatism is going to be a lot less if you go temporally, but again, if you're using a plate haptic, it's technically a lot more difficult. It's very important that you have a very central, proper rhexis, which is about 5 to 5.5 millimeter. An eccentric rhexis can cause problem with lens centration, and CTR, capsular tension rings, it's a contentious issue. Some people swear by it, that you have to, if you are using a multifocal, you've got to have a CTR. I don't use that. And you have to, of course, align the lens. It goes without saying that even a small misalignment can cause a lot of problem. You can lose the effect. The usual cause for misalignment post-operatively is if you left any viscoelastic behind, because it makes the lens rotate. If there is no viscoelastic, and that's why the idea of using hydro insertion is very, very, very nice. If you allow the AC to become shallow post-operatively, the lens can move. So make sure you have a very watertight wound. And if you make a too small rhexis, we all know that you can have all those problems, including the decentration, tilt of the lens. And if you end up with a posterior capsular rupture, abandon the procedure. Just make sure you leave aside your ego that you spent so much money, made the patient spend so much money. Don't touch it. Just do an ordinary monofocal. If you want, you can do LRIs, astigmatic keratotomy. I normally don't prefer to. If I have a PCR with vitreous loss, I don't use the toric IOL. You can't put it in the sulcus. It won't stay fit. And as it is, it's a plate haptic single piece lens. It's not supposed to be put in the sulcus. So I abandon my procedure usually. Post-operatively, of course, you have to dilate the pupils, make sure where your axis is, and confirm it with your slit lamp by positioning the slit lamp and make sure your axis is right, especially if the patient is not at anticipated result. Patient still is not very happy. Always use post-operative lubricants. That's what I always do. And if I found that patient is having problem with intermediate vision at 2 weeks, I undercorrect the other eye. So never do both eyes together. And if you have a spherical error, which is still there, I've used on odd occasions a Sulcoflex ciliary fixated lens. Not had to do any IOL exchange so far. And usually night vision problems are seen if there is decentration, posterior capsular opacification, or dry eyes. or if there is any misalignment. And these are my results. 100% of my patients became spectacle independent with this lens implant. I've done quite a few of these. These are some of the issues that we need to touch upon before and after the surgery. Patients may have amblyopia because of meridional amblyopia seen in very high astigmats. And I've already talked about tilted optic disc syndrome. Make sure you always compare your refractive cell with your phase cells. And if there is a problem like tilted optic disc, do not consider a multifocal toric. Which eye to do first? I always do the dominant eye first. Because of the binocular rivalry, if you do non-dominant eye first, and if the patients keep doing this, they are not very happy, especially if both eyes are open. And if the non-operated eye happens to be the dominant eye, they don't appreciate the good result unless you make them see separately. I've not had to do any post-operative touch-ups like astigmatic keratotomy. But if you want, you can go on this website called astigmatismfix.com. When you end up with a residual astigmatism, it tells you what to do actually. Of course, you have to use your own judgment. Wait for about 3 months before you consider yak capsulotomy, because otherwise you can end up with a bit of CME. Reading speed is something that we normally neglect, and you would find that with multifocal toric, your reading speed typically increases by 20 to 30%, at least in my patients. Normally I would have, let's say, 110, 120 before surgery. They will reach about 130 words per minute using just ordinary typograph, and they do very well. And I've not had any problem with glare halos or starburst, especially using this lens implant. But if you have, usually ask the patient to persevere, have a bit of patience, and usually it settles down. Small. I think I'll finish here. There's nothing great in this video except ordinary paper.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chawla, for accepting my invitation to be part of this course and sharing your expertise. Now, next we have Dr. Vidushi Sharma. She's from Kota Suvi Eye Institute. We all have been hearing her voice in beautiful educational videos which Dr. Suresh and Vidushi have been posting on Facebook. Now she is here. Dr. Vidushi Sharma.
Thank you, Dr. Harshal, for your very kind words. My talk is, despite all the care that you may have taken, you may still end up with a few problems post-operatively, and what you can do to fix these problems. So we'll discuss about repositioning misaligned toric IOLs. I have no financial interest. Now, there can be many reasons why you end up with a problem and some residual astigmatism in your post-op period. You could, of course, have had a problem in your pre-op measurements. There could be incorrect marking of reference points, and either because of incorrect marking or for any other reason you may have placed the IOL along the wrong axis. There may be a failure to take into account the surgically induced astigmatism, which is being talked about in detail, or the thing that is again also being talked about is the patient's posterior corneal curvature. And there are quite a few studies that have been done recently about the patient's posterior corneal curvature that may add to the total toricity of the cornea. A posterior corneal curvature is normally against the rule, and therefore, of course, the aim that you have is to leave the patient with zero cylinder. But if you have to choose between with the rule and against the rule, it is better to leave the patient a little with the rule. One, because of the posterior corneal toricity that adds against the rule. Second, because most patients would tolerate a with the rule astigmatism better than they would tolerate an against the rule. And finally, because in all these aging eyes, there is anyway a gradual against the rule shift in the cornea, even when you have had a cataract surgery with a temporal incision. So if you have to choose between leaving the patient a little with the rule versus against the rule, it is better to leave a little with the rule. Then once you've finally ended up in a problem, you have to decide whether IOL rotation is the right option to do or not. So you must make sure that once you rotate the IOL, it will result in improvement of the cylinder as well as the expected refraction. And then whatever way you calculate this, the residual refraction after rotation of the IOL should be 0.5 diopter astigmatism or less. If even after rotating you calculate it will be sort of 1 diopter or something, then it is not very useful. And some people have described rotating the toric IOL on the slit lamp. I don't think it is recommended at all. It is better to do it in the operation theatre with standard sterile techniques. So like Dr. Chawla had mentioned, there is this website called astigmatismfix.com where you can put in your values about the refraction that you have now in the post-operative period, the toric IOL model that you have put in, at which axis you have put it in, and it will give you the toric results analyzer module will tell you how much the IOL needs to be rotated, and after rotating this will give you, this is the your current axis, this red one is the axis where you have to place it, and what will be your expected residual refraction after you have rotated the IOL. So once you have all this data, you can go ahead and plan your IOL rotation, and you will get a printout like this, which you must take with you to the OT, just like you do for the toric calculators. And here it also gives a graph that this is the exact axis where the cylinder would be expected to be almost zero, and if it is off axis, then this is the expected residual refraction. Now there are many futuristic equipments that are either already available or in the pipeline, which will help you in these kind of things. One is the Discovery system from Innovative Visual Systems. Again, here you can put in your current data, the IOL intended axis, this is what you had actually intended. Then you put what you have now, and then the machine will calculate how much you have to rotate, and it will also give you a simulated image as to what the patient is seeing now and what the patient will see later. Of course, all these diagrams are very convincing for you as well as for the patient, to convince him that, okay, what I'm going to do will be useful for you. So these machines, they will give you the same kind of information which you get from that website also, but in a more graphic fashion, and it is also very useful as a display for the patient. So this Discovery system is a combination of aberrometer, corneal topographer, autorefractor, retroillumination camera, pupillometer, and there are many such machines which are coming up with these multifunctions now. Then you have to decide when to rotate. It should not be done before 2 weeks because you want your refraction to stabilize, and it should not be done beyond 3 to 6 months because of the fibrosis and other problems that may have set in. And the ideal time is between 2 to 4 weeks, when there is some stickiness that is already developing because of the fibrosis that is initiated. So you hope that rotating it will not be difficult, but at the same time, wherever you place, it will stick there and stay there. Now, once you are doing a second time, even the first time you want your IOL to be perfectly aligned, but the second time, of course, it is even more crucial. And these things I'm only talking about because these machines are now, some of them are already available in the Indian market, some of them will be available in the next 1 or 2 years. So it is a good thing to know about these. For good alignment, now whatever we have followed till now is marking the reference axis on the slit lamp, then marking the axis under the operating microscope and putting it along that axis that has already been talked about. But now you have methods where you can take a preoperative photograph of the anterior segment in the retroillumination mode, and like you have for LASIK, most machines would have some form of iris registration to avoid the problems because of the cyclotorsion of the eye in the supine position. So similarly, you can use it for cataract surgery. So you have either iris imaging based methods, which is the hard straight Osher toric alignment system or the Hoya eye trace, or the limbal registration methods, which is the SMI that is available from Alcon, Zeiss and True Vision. Or you can also use intraoperative aberrometry, either in the static way, which is the WaveTech ORA, or a real-time dynamic intraoperative aberrometry, which is the HOLOS, which is not even commercially available in the US now, but will probably be available in the next Academy meeting. So this is the Osher toric alignment system, which you use with hard straight slit lamps. This is based on iris registration. This is the Hoya eye trace. This is commercially available. The company has taken demos at many centers and has also started selling in India. This is a ray tracing wavefront aberrometer. So the company claims it is a good aberrometer because of the ray tracing principle, and it combines aberrometry with corneal topography, with autorefraction, pupillometry and autokeratometry. And it also has a software, like already has been mentioned, and these Aldivar calipers for aligning the toric IOLs. And this machine also actually gives you angle, kappa angle, alpha values, etc. So you can decide whether a multifocal IOL would, it actually tells you whether a multifocal IOL is a good option in this patient or not. Then you have the SMI, which is actually manufactured by Sensomotoric Instruments, bought over by Alcon now. This is also commercially available now in India. And this gives you this kind of a transparency within the microscope, and you can align your system IOL according to this. This is based on limbal and iris registration, and it recognizes 250 points in the image. You can either put this image into the microscope and you can look through that grid while you are doing the surgery, or you can have a separate dedicated monitor which will show you the grid and your toric IOL alignment. It also helps in measuring the size of rixes, which sometimes is crucial because you want the, even in toric IOLs, you want the rixes to just be covering the margin to avoid any post-op rotation. It also helps in placing of incisions and centering of IOLs, like already mentioned with multifocal IOLs. There are various screen transparencies available from different companies which you can incorporate from the microscopes. With the Zeiss Opmi Lumera, you already have the Z-Align Toric Assistant, which again helps in aligning the IOL. This is not yet available commercially in India, but many people use it in the West. This is a refractive cataract toolset available from True Vision. It actually gives you 3-dimensional computer-aided guidance application for cataract surgery, and this is also based on limbal and iris registration. It is, however, claimed that in limbal registration, if you're basing on, many people actually do it without these equipments, that they look at episcleral vessels preoperatively and take photographs, and then they take a photograph post-operatively. But during surgery, these episcleral vessels may constrict because of your dilating drops if you're using epinephrine, etc. So the vessels may not be that exactly the same as they were preoperatively. Then you have the intraoperative aberrometry-based systems. One is the WaveTech ORA, which was earlier called Orange, which is a static aberrometry. Again, this is commercially available. It actually gives you the intraoperative aberrometry. So, especially if you've had a previous keratorefractive procedure in the eye, then these systems are useful because it will tell you whether your aberrations are actually being reduced after you have placed the toric IOL. So even during surgery, once you have placed the toric IOL, it will give you an aberrometry picture, and you can see whether rotating the toric IOL will help in further reducing the aberrations. And this is in the pipeline. This is not yet commercially available. This is the dynamic intraoperative aberrometry, where it is claimed that you actually don't have to do any, all this marking, etc. preoperatively will become irrelevant because you can put the IOL and you can see how the aberrometry is changing with your rotation, and then you can finally select that position which gives you the least, which gives you a zero cylinder on the table. And these are more useful in cases like where you had post-refractive surgery, etc. Then after you've decided that the IOL rotation is going to help you, how do you do it? You first open up your, make a side port and inject viscoelastic as usual, and put the viscoelastic between the anterior rhexis margin and the IOL so that it becomes loose and the IOL can be rotated. And it is best to do rotation through a side port so that you can maintain the anterior chamber, but if needed, of course, you can open the main incision again and then seal. There's just one small video. This is a video of Dr. Sanjay Chaudhary because I didn't have a video of IOL, post-operative IOL rotation. So here the axis has already been marked, and this is a side port. I'm using this video with his permission. This is a side port that has been opened. This is the second side port, and like the Acrosoft toric IOL is more sticky, and therefore it may stay, it is likely to rotate less in the post-op period, but at the same time it is more difficult to rotate if you actually want to rotate it post-operatively. The plate haptics, I have no idea about the plate haptic IOL that was talked about earlier, but most plate haptics like Star Toric, etc. would be easier to rotate. So once you've opened up, then you rotate the IOL and make sure again that you don't leave any viscoelastic behind the eye, and seal the incisions. In the end, of course, if you realize that the IOL rotation is not going to help much because of either other factors like have been mentioned that the disc is tilted, or there are other causes of astigmatism within the eye, and also like it was mentioned, posterior corneal curvature plays a role when you see that your corneal astigmatism, keratometry-based astigmatism, is very different from your refractive astigmatism. So not all of it may be lens-reduced, that it will be removed once you have removed the cataract. So in those cases, you have to be very, very careful. And once you realize that IOL rotation will not help, then you can either do an LRI, which still gives good results, even though they may change over a period of time, but they give you a good result at that particular point of time and the patient is satisfied and happy. Or you can go in for excimer-based refractive laser correction, but here it is recommended that you wait even after you have done the YAG capsulotomy at 3 months, because you're rotating the toric IOL, and then do the excimer-based, because it is a toric IOL, and then do the excimer-based surgery. And then light adjustable IOLs that are now coming. And like it was mentioned, counseling is extremely important. So sometimes you may have to do glasses, and there are various studies that have shown that even after the best possible care that has been taken, at least 20 to 25% people still have to use glasses sometimes, even for their distance vision. So it is very important that in counseling you inform the patients that they will be not dependent on their glasses for most of their activities, but sometimes for very fine vision they may still have to use glasses, so that they are more willing to accept that after the surgery. Thank you. And one more thing I would just like to mention is that when you say that, what is the best method to do keratometry, it is a way, it is like step by step. So once you are doing cataract surgery routinely, and for those who want to initiate into toric IOLs, the best thing is that whatever, even in your standard monofocal IOLs want to be perfectly accurate. So whatever keratometry you think gets the best results in your hand, practice it, and then practice your marking, etc. on the standard monofocal IOLs, so that then the only step is to just put in that toric IOL and align it, and then there is no additional step when you're using the toric IOLs.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vidushi. And one more thing that previously when we used to see our cataract patients, we straight away used to send them to our counselors. But now our keratometry, it always precedes the counseling. Because you counsel the patient about all your packages and everything, and you do keratometry, you realize he has, 3 or 4 diopter cylinder. So your whole counseling again it changes. So now our counseling is always after the keratometry is done. Okay. So next we have Dr. Suresh Pandey. He's from Suvi Eye Institute, Kota, and he has more than, I think, 200 peer-reviewed international publications to his credit. He has done extensive work with Professor David Apple, and he'll be talking about the toric IOLs in pediatric age group.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harshul, for inviting me to this wonderful course. Today I will be discussing about use of toric and multifocal toric IOL in pediatric cataract surgery. I have no financial interest. Once you talk about the pediatric cataract surgery, there are 2 major issues you should always consider. The first include the issue of lens power calculation, and the second is posterior capsule management. So coming to the lens power calculation, you know that these small eyes are growing eyes. So there are various guidelines are proposed in the literature which address the lens power calculation. And secondly, the posterior capsule opacification is always universal, almost always universal in younger children. So there are some surgical techniques have been proposed to manage the posterior capsule. So the now question comes that why you should implant toric IOL in pediatric population? Because the pediatric cases have associated astigmatism as a refractive error, and therefore the amblyopia treatment for younger patients is easier post-operatively if we correct their astigmatism with the toric IOLs. And they don't need complicated optics in their like contact lenses or glasses for the treatment of amblyopia. This remains one of the most important indication for using toric IOL in pediatric age group. Now, which age group in pediatric population you should try for toric lenses? As we have discussed already that these eyes are growing eyes, and there is issue about the posterior capsule opacification. So there is no fixed guidelines, but almost like 6 to 8 years onwards, when child can sit on the sit level, you can do reference marking. You can plan toric IOL implantation, and after 8 years of age, you can leave the posterior capsule intact without doing primary posterior capsulectomy. So once you implant the toric IOLs, and if you do primary posterior capsulectomy, it's difficult. The toric IOL may rotate. So after 8 years of age, you may consider implanting toric IOL in pediatric cases. And of course, the issues related to the capsulectomy, the posterior capsule management, the child may need YAG capsulectomy in post-op period, and there are some issues related to closure of the incision. Some children may need some suturing, which you can remove in the early post-op period. And in post-op period, the amblyopia therapy is very important, and you can also the child may need the secondary procedure like piggyback implantation if there is some residual refractive error is there. So one of the most important pearl for pediatric for introducing the toric IOLs in pediatric population is counseling. Counsel the parents and family member that why you want to put toric IOL in children, and counsel them about the need of secondary procedure if there is a refractive surprise which happens in the post-op period. And one of the most important pearl is the accurate marking of the eye in the preoperative period. And once you can mark the eye precisely, then the surgical technique is more or less same. And as discussed earlier, before you try the toric IOL implantation in pediatric population, you can practice in the adult eyes, you can practice marking, or you can practice the reference and access marking in adult eyes. And we had done so far more than 100 toric IOL implantation in pediatric age group. And the youngest was patient in our series was 6-year-old child with zonular cataract who has a corneal cylinder of 1.5 diopter. And we have implanted Alcon Acrysoft toric lens of T3 model. And this child did very well in terms of the best corrected visual acuity before surgery was finger counting 2 meters, which improved to 6.9 in the post-op period. And the second case which I am going to show you is the multifocal toric IOL implantation in pediatric population. As mentioned by our previous speaker that before you plan multifocal toric IOL in pediatric population, it's very important to do the thorough examination. Like OCT is very good idea to do it before before you plan for multiple toric IOL. Once you do care reading, make sure that you do care reading before putting any dilator drops, because once you alter the tear film, the care reading may change. So any case who is fit for toric or multifocal toric IOL, you do the care reading first without putting any anesthetic or dilator drops, and make sure that the tear film is healthy. And nowadays we have various models are available from various companies which can helpful to provide good distance and near vision in these cases. So multifocal toric IOL can be helpful in children in more than, you can try in more than 10 or 12 years of children, so that there is no chances of refractive surprise, or there is less chances of posterior capsule opacification. Another short video clip which I am going to share with you is the use of primary piggyback implantation of multifocal and toric lenses. So this is the case a 16-year-old child who came to us. The lens power was 35 diopter. So this case we implanted 20 diopter of toric IOL in the capsular bag, and then we implanted 15 diopter multifocal lens on the top of the toric lens. And so this is the case of primary multifocal and toric lens implantation in a piggyback manner. One of the issues in these cases can be interlenticule opacity. So what we did after implantation of multifocal and both lenses in the capsular bag, we did YAG laser anterior capsulotomy after 6 weeks period in order to decrease the possibility of interlenticule opacity formation. So this is the case of primary piggyback implantation of multifocal and toric lenses. So, and the second case which I am going to show you is the secondary implantation of Sulcoflex multifocal lens in a child. So this is the case on the top. You can see the video of 12-year-old child who came to us with a zonular cataract. Once we did his first eye, there was amblyopia or lazy eye. So we planned for a toric lens, and in the other eye, when we this eye which I'm showing you here, the vision was 6/6, and for distance, so the parents wanted to have good correction for near as well. So after a few weeks after surgery, 8 weeks after surgery, we planned for the Sulcoflex lens implantation in the ciliary sulcus. So nowadays you can plan Sulcoflex multifocal lenses or toric lens to correct the residual refractive error. So this is the implantation of Sulcoflex lens in the sulcus, and the post-op vision was very good. So in summary, now we have toric and multifocal toric lenses are available. So pediatric cataract cases can get significant benefit from these new technology, and of course we should be careful to counsel the parents just to make sure that there can be refractive surprise. So you should counsel them precisely that there can be need of secondary procedures such as piggyback lens implantation or additional need of glasses. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Just
Pandey.
a small question for Suresh. I was just wondering how you did just to the audience benefit, how your IOL power was 30, and how did you extrapolate it to 35?
I will power 35 diopter, yeah. So what I just did I implanted 20 diopter of toric lens and 15 diopter of the
IOL power calculation was 30.
35.
So you just did simple addition.
Yeah, simple, yeah. So it's just put both lenses in the bag and then After that, I just did yak capsulotomy in the post-op period to decrease the possibility of interlentil obesity.
Yeah. That was very innovative, and even you won the award at APACRS last year. Yeah, congratulations. So next we have Dr. Anand Pathasarthi, who is a senior consultant cataract, cornea, in Vasan Eye Care Hospitals, and he has done extensive work on keratoconus and in post-keratoplasty patients also, and he has big series of using toric IOLs in these cases. He'll be sharing his experience on these cases.
Thank you so much, Harshul. It's a pleasure to be with such an august faculty. Since I'll just go over some important points. Some of them have already been covered. No financial interest, but it would be nice to have some. I'll start with the patient who's a 50-year-old lady, business or government contracts, diagnosed to have cataracts at another hospital, came to us with a history of RK done in both eyes about 10 years back with a myopia of -8. And more importantly, in history, her children are doctors and son is a clinical trial specialist. He's done intensive research on types of IOLs and me. And he's read all my papers published. He has a discussion with me on my PCR rates, number of premium IOL surgeries I've done. And son also discusses the average post-op intervals, including the confidence intervals.
Dr. Chawla has one suggestion.
Just send this patient to your competition.
All right. The doctor also wanted to observe surgery, and we gave the standard pre-op medication. My pre-op medication included prayers to Vishnu, Shiva, and Jesus, because she reads the Bible. And lucky for both me and the patient, the surgery actually went off perfectly. At the end of the day, the hospital was happy with the income, and I was happy with the outcome. In terms of the surgery itself, the RK, just to show you the photographs of the RK mark, and I'll tell you the reason we considered premium IOLs, and it's important if you have had keratorefractive surgery that just see the RK marks if you're dealing with RK patients, how deep the RK marks are. In this, it was less than about 30%, and that's the reason for the undercorrection. And we could actually safely consider the surgery. Also important that you look at the astigmatism. It's a regular astigmatism on a post-RK patient, and that's another reason you can actually use these premium IOLs. She's of course doing well, and she's followed up almost for about 3 years or after surgery. This is one other patient, and I have some referrals for cornea. And this was an ulcer patient whom we treated. Patient resolved. And I thought I'd done a good job with the keratoplasty after surgery till I saw the topography, and that showed about 6.5 diopters of cylinder. And in these, you're probably looking at the customized range of IOLs, and that's what we actually did for this patient. And also important, though, it's a slightly irregular astigmatism. These topographies you need to take after making sure the tear film is actually very good. Not this patient, but a different patient whom we did customized IOL adapter for about 8. This is a post-therapeutic keratoplasty, about a 1.5 year post follow-up. In this keratoplasty patient, it's important that we take the incision away from the gaff hole junction. I guess didn't have money as Harshul to actually get those fancy toric markers, so I'm using an old cylinder marker, which is basically made of steel. You mark your incisions. This is according to the plan that was actually sent to us. The phaco is actually quite standard in terms of procedure, and you do a rhexis. In just what I did differently was, because it was a slightly hypermature cataract, I did the capsulotomy with the phaco probe just to decompress the lens capsule. Then I completed the rhexis with the standard rhexis forceps. You can use an MI. I think that would have been a good idea in this patient, and do it, of course, with a lot of viscoat in the eye. The cataract is not very hard in these post-therapeutic PKIs because it's an inflammatory cataract. You can actually just aspirate most of the lens out, and it doesn't take too much of time in terms of the phaco power. What was the reason I did opt for this also was because you reduce the phaco power. Remember that most of these keratoplasty patients need to have an endothelial cell count before you actually go ahead and plan these procedures. Also not a bad idea to actually do the pachymetry, because that gives a good indication of the endothelial function. Anything beyond 550, 580 that is definitely a healthy cornea. Anything beyond 650, according to the literature published, is something that you probably need to consider a chance of graft failure. I did make initial smaller rexus. I then extended it further, and because of the inflammatory membrane, it's a lot more difficult to actually use this. But in a way, when you have a slightly smaller rexus, and I used a plate haptic lens in this patient, it was actually a lot more fixated. It doesn't actually move. As one of the speakers mentioned, if you have a plate haptic lens, the rotation stability is slightly better than a standard C-loop or open C-loop, whatever you call it. I did remark the patient intraoperatively because these markings tend to wash off over a period of time during the surgery itself, and implantation, of course, standard. In this, you have customized toric IOLs. You have options between Rayner and Zeiss available. I'm not sure if the Indian IOLs are customized. The rest of the surgery is, of course, quite simple. In terms of implantation, I did use viscoelastic because this was a graft patient, and it's important that you protect the endothelium. You might need to even use one whole visco per surgery, but cover these patients with a lot more steroids than you would normally do, because sometimes in a few patients, once you do the cataract surgery, there is an initiation of graft rejection. In this, I prefer, in a plate haptic lens, I prefer to put the haptics onto the iris and just tuck them in, and that's usually the end of surgery. It's easier to slightly twist, but most of these plate haptic lenses have not had issues with rotation post-operatively. We did a small group of study which we had presented at ASCRS last year, where we had group 1 of a standard toric IOLs in terms of age, and we also had a group 2 which had some previous cataract surgery. In terms of outcomes, the patients who had standard toric IOLs with normal regular astigmatism, the visuals are actually very good. But in a set of patients in our series about 9, the uncorrected vision was actually quite good, which is 612. Remember, in post-keratoplasty patients, for toric IOLs, your thresholds tend to be slightly lower, and you can get about 612 in about majority of the patients, which is very good uncorrected vision. Most of them did do well post-operatively, and none of them actually had a graft rejection. This was spherically put in pre and post. You can make out a bit of hyperopia, which I think in most of these patients is actually quite good. Also, in terms of manifest cylinder, a lot of them are less than quarter diopter. In terms of managing patients with previous corneal disease, I think broadly epithelial, stromal, and endothelial disease, I think that is important. This 61-year-old patient with arthritis, he had Schirmer's of 1 and breakup time of less than 1. Ocular surface disease is something I do in my dry eye patients, and this was one of these ideal patients. He's a biochemist by profession. He's undergone PI for angle closure. He's been on anti-glaucoma drugs, and then complains of dry eye. And he told me, doctor, whenever I cry, I don't get tears. I said, what's the reason? He says, I've been married for 20 years. So I said, I understand, I've been married for 10 too. And we basically did post-op punctal plugs. We put in the plugs, and you can make out an improvement in the ocular surface. It looks actually quite nice. Important, remember that some of these cataract patients tend to be, of course, on the elder age group. They have borderline ocular surface disease, and it can occur even after uneventful cataract surgery. I know in a busy clinic, not very ideal, but a fluorescein staining and a Schirmer's is a good idea. And if you're working on autoimmune disease and previous dry eye patients, make sure the optical surface is actually very good before you actually go ahead. It's a good idea to give mild surface acting steroids, topical tear supplements, managing coexisting systemic and ocular disease before you go ahead, and Schirmer's of 5 is good. If you have stromal scars or corneal dystrophy or corneal ectatic disease, you could, in partial stromal thickness scars or leukomas which are peripheral, they will benefit from a cataract surgery alone if it's not in the visual axis. Patients who presented with corneal dystrophy, there's one other patient, and cataract, in these patients, toric not a good idea, just do a phacoemulsification and a monofocal IOL. And if you have corneas like this, where the central visibility is actually low, you use basically an endoilluminator. And a lot of these granular dystrophy patients who are about 45, 47, when they tend to get a bit of nuclear sclerosis, do well with a cataract surgery alone in the initial stage. Just a broad outline of how I treat these cases. If you've got a central scar with advanced stromal disease, you can do a sequential or a combined surgery. Sequential as in you do IOL power calculation with the post-keratoplasty eye with all sutures out that Rajesh mentioned, roughly about 2 months after all the sutures have been removed. It's more predictable, it's about 3 months apart, and the disadvantage being it's 2 surgeries, but in private practice it might not be a bad idea. Combined surgery, if you have standard care, you can do it with a single surgery, and it is of course surgeon dependent, and you can need to do an open globe surgery. Sometimes you need to be careful in these eyes. If you got mild to moderate keratoconus with a standard IOL power calculation usually suffices. You can take keratometry from the pentacam. I prefer the pentacam. Take into account the posterior corneal astigmatism. We've already discussed that. But in keratoconic eyes, make sure that because there is bowing of the posterior cornea, you need to take the amount of astigmatism in the posterior cornea a lot more into account. In advanced keratoconus, you can just do keratoplasty with a phaco emulsification if there is coexisting cataract. This I think. Okay, this is one other patient, a government employee, underwent right eye cataract surgery in 2001. He was referred for some query cornea problem, and we get a lot of unhappy cataract patients in our cornea clinic, unsatisfied with the visual recovery, and there was no retinal pathology, and the best corrected vision was about 6/18. And doing very carefully, the operating surgeon, well done phaco, but he's missed the LASIK flap that the patient had undergone a LASIK about 10 years back. And that was the reason for the defective vision. You do the op scan. You can make out that he has post-LASIK ectasia in both the eyes, the right and the left eyes, and that was the cause for his defective vision, not the earlier nuclear sclerosis he had in both the eyes. So the suggested treatment at that time was basically to do a collagen cross-link and Intacs. We went ahead for post-LASIK ectasia with collagen cross-linking in both eyes because that was the conventional wisdom at that time, and on follow-up the vision was stable. The plan is now was to basically do a TopoLink PRK to regularize the corneal surface, and in the right eye, since he already had cataract surgery, just do glasses and contact lenses. In the left eye, you customize based on the corneal astigmatism and the asphericity which we had access to. This was the pentacam, and he came in 2013, and I was wiser by that time, as you can make out, and he had corneas like this. And we had a new machine, and in that we could actually do a TopoLink. So remember that in a TopoLink PRK, you correct the irregular astigmatism by doing an ablation in the irregular part. Now this is the cornea, and the ablation is actually opposite of what the corneal ectasia is. Tends to make the cornea slightly more regular, more spherical. And we had access to high trace. After doing that for one and the right eye, you can make out the cornea in both eyes. The vision is actually doing quite well. He's done a lot better. This is pre-op and post-op regular astigmatism. He will resolve with a contact lens or glass. We did that for both the eyes. In the left eye, we are planning to do a cataract surgery. Remember that in keratoconus and keratoplasty patients, do repeated IOL power calculations, and toric IOL needs to be oriented to the steepest axis. In surgical patients with corneal grafts, important that you do an endothelial cell count. Topography is mandatory. The limbal incision needs to avoid the graft hole junction. Meticals technique with viscoat, and tend to use slightly lower parameters because it's safer for the endothelium. In conclusion, there are multiple approaches for cataract with patients with corneal disease. Ensure a healthy ocular surface, and you can have multiple options when you're treating these patients. Remember, meditate well before you go ahead. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anand. So, if there are any questions from the audience, we can take 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, sir. Dr.
If I can make a few comments.
Yeah.
We have been talking about why manual keratometry, because we don't do mandatory manual keratometry even for our multifocal IOL. Yeah. So I'm talking about why manual keratometry in toric IOL. We have so many sophisticated gadgets, starting from pentacam to op scan to IOL master. We don't do manual keratometry routinely in our routine IOL calculation as well as multifocal. The reason given for this is that once we are doing a manual keratometry, you are not going to miss bioblique astigmatism, because all of these sophisticated gadgets always give K rating at 90 degrees to each other. So in bioblique, this IOL calculations for toric is not going to be okay, and it's not recommended for bioblique astigmatism. That's why it's recommended you have to do a manual keratometry in these cases. Another point is By doing a manual keratometry, if a patient has a little bit of dry eye, you will also come to know that because smudge mask, because you have to treat dry eye before making any calculation. At least for maybe 4 to 6 weeks, you will see a change even in keratometric value. Until and unless you treat the dry eye, don't calculate the toric IOL, K readings. And third thing is, as you must have seen in most of the videos, while we make a mark, there is a smudging of the mark. To overcome that, we have published one paper in ASCRS last year. What you do is, on the slit lamp, you make a very small nick with a 30 gauge needle, so to produce a fixed blood spot on the fixed part of the conjunctiva, not on the mobile part of the conjunctiva, that make alignment of the IOL toric IOL much more easier. Because most of the studies shows that there is around 3 to 5 degrees of misalignment in most of the cases. So if we take into account that each degree of misalignment will lead to 3.3% error, and if we take into account many people don't calculate their SICS, their own surgically induced astigmatism, and if also we take into account not taking into account the posterior corneal astigmatism, all these three factors can magnify the error in post-operative toric IOL. So all these points should be carefully taken. And one more thing which I normally do is, most of the people don't have all these sophisticated gadgets like Pentacam or iTrace, though we have Pentacam as well as iTrace. But to simplify things, as even Vidoshi has pointed out, if you can mark those exenfield vessels are nothing but anterior ciliary vessels coming out of the recti muscle. As they penetrate into the sclera, you will see some pigmentation there. They are fixed point, they are not mobile, and especially if you are doing toric IOL surgery on the topical, you don't have any swelling of the conjunctiva, phimosis of conjunctiva, or sometimes you have pigment points on the limbus. If you mark them, then I don't have to mark even the vertical and horizontal axis. If you have two marks and you are on the slit lamp pre-op, you mark the axis, because on the slit lamp there is a graticule. You can mark the axis of any point on the slit lamp. There is a 10-degree graticule on Hawk slit, as well as maybe 5-degree graticule on Zeiss slit lamp. So if you want to increase your accuracy even without marking, so in that case you don't have to take patient, that increase the flow of your patients. You don't have to take patient to the slit lamp again. So I straight away, without marking, take the patient to the table and do my marking according to the photograph I did.
Points well taken. So with this we Dr. Parul has something to add.
We talk a lot about alpha and kappa. I wanted to know how many of us are practically using it and what is the easiest way to diagnose it and correct it.
The way I find out is, because since I started using Aladdin, with one touch of button I know what angle kappa is. So I don't have to do anything.
Of course, most of us would not have something like that.
In that case, it is very difficult to measure it on the slit lamp, but you can make out when you're doing your IOL master, you can make out the angle kappa is there. That's the best way to find out.
You can measure it on synaptophore.
Yes, you can actually, but we don't have synaptophore anymore. So we normally, because I have access to Aladdin, that's why I find it very easy.
Okay. Thank you, all of you, and I'll thank my co-instructors for being here. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and we come to a very exciting 1 hour presentation and discussion here from you, setting up private practice. I have with me Dr. Anil Kulkarni and Dr. Prem Raj. He joins us, and he'll be there, and I'll be with you on practice, how to set up an eye hospital. Setting up a practice is the dream of every ophthalmologist. It appears a Herculean task and requires knowledge of vastly diverse ingredients for setting up of the practice. So this session will focus some of the crucial components without going into too much details. The focus will be on small nut and bolt general principles and what are the different aspects of the practice about which you should be aware of. When you have decided to go in for practice, please remember that you have chosen to work 84 hours a week for yourself rather than 40 hours a week for someone else. You cannot afford to lose. So put your best foot forward. And there is a lot more to setting up of a practice of ophthalmology than meets the eye. It should have a scientific approach and not started on the whims or on someone else's instigation. I'll request Dr. Anil Kulkarni to please come and share his experiences about group practice.
And Chairman Dr. Greva, sorry for the delay. We are talking about setting up the group practice, and I firmly believe that this is one of the ways to go forward in our individual practices henceforth. If you are going to manage the fight against the NGOs and the corporate hospitals which are coming up, there is nothing less than joining hands which is going to make us survive in our practice. No financial disclosures. So basically you also know that eye specialist gets converted to capital eye specialist due to the faith and godly image conferred by patients. They pay us, touch our feet, saying that you have given us eyesight. Then that eye specialist exerts and does efforts to excel individually. He starts feeling that I must do better than anybody else, and then of course compromises his quality of life. Sometimes he may compromise with ethics and knowledge update because the patience which we used to have 30 years back probably is getting less and less now in the newer generation. Due to the fear of being overtaken by our fellow eye surgeons, we keep on buying high-cost machines, which remains grossly underutilized. You imagine in any private practice, the theatre doesn't run more than 3 to 4 hours a day. We are then treated as potential customers by corporate companies for their profit motive. Somebody takes a car, another goes for a bigger machine, and the third goes for the sky and a plane to travel. What happens is that we start feeling that yes, we are dying into a debt trap, and somebody advises us, look, your income is low, you are deep in debt, you have a bad credit, you must act immediately. And what BD advises is, okay, then take some more high interest credit card, go for another private bank, and they will give you at a cheaper rate. You will be surprised how much happy the banks are when they are extending the loan to us. Who loses? The individual eye surgeon due to limited access to high cost technology, because you can't have all the machines together in one practice every time. And a helpless patient, because from where you are going to recover the cost of your machines? It's going to be from the patients. So he has limited resources to pay, and you are trying to do a race of modernization. What is the solution? Maybe from capital I we go to B, from individual effort to cohesive efforts, for individual acclaim to a collective acclaim, and for individual brand to a cooperative brand. Only thing is, when you are joining together, if you practice what you preach, you do not need to preach. So from I, can we become we when you are going to practice? The advantage is it shares infrastructure and equipment cost, reduced cost of service to the patients, multiple facilities can be present under one roof, individual members can acquire new technology. We used to be proud in our initial days saying that we are not jack of all trades, but we are master of all trades. Then down the line we realized that one person cannot achieve excellence in all the subspecialties which the ophthalmology is now getting. And then obviously if you have a group practice, you have a better quality of life. Ask your wives when you go home. So one type of group practice which you are all aware of is a contemporary surgeons and friends. They join together and share equal the investment as well as the profit and loss. There is a democracy in the decisions, but however, you must respect each other because you have closed down your own practices there is no individual practice. And this was initially started by Disha Eye Hospital near Calcutta with their additional branches now. So I am not going to detail because this is not my domain. Now what we started was, surgeons will continue the regular practice, but will join hands for the specific activity like a laser center or ultrasound clinic or maybe for eye banking or a common operation theatre facilities. This is a separate entity as a private company, but controlled by clinicians, and then there are additional facilities provided to the patient. This was started in '94 in the form of Prathamesh Laser Center at Sangli in Maharashtra. These were the people who were together. We established in '96, 27 eye surgeons participated. There was no vitreoretinal surgeon that time because they were a scarcity at that time, and it was a 45 lakhs project. In '96, for a small district like us, 45 lakhs was a huge amount. But then we contributed only 50,000 per person, and then took a bank loan. We rented a neutral place, and we purchased the best equipments available at that time. We had one industrialist to guide us. Everybody may not agree with me, but we are most of the times fools in business. So it's better that some businessman also guides us. Whether to listen to him or not is our problem, but at least we should be aware of what are the good business practices. So we purchased all the lasers and fundus camera and everything. Why we did it? Because we wanted to treat our own patients. Our benefit was we did not need any further investment in diagnostic equipments. We could concentrate on modernization of operation theatre equipments, and then after a period of nearly 16, 17 years of practice, I could at least take first holiday after we started this. And there was a reduced moral responsibility for seeing patient becoming blind. Those of my age realized that whenever there used to be a diabetic retinopathy with hemorrhages, we used to say that either you go to Sankara Nethralaya or you go to Ahmedabad. The finances, after 5 years when the loan was fully repaid, and those who had invested used to get at least 15 to 20% on their investment, the working partner, those who were actually doing the lasers, was earning about 40 to 60,000 per year, and mind well, it was on an investment of 50,000. The patient charges, that's also important, remained unchanged for years because there was no immediate need of increasing the charges, and we could give concession for non-affording people. Then of course we had a newer ambition, and then we decided to have a examer laser. Now this was established at a different location because all directors of our earlier company were not willing to start a new venture. Some said that LASIK is criminal for cornea and appeal, and some said that LASIK is one of the fantastic surgery which has ever been involved. So obviously with two different views, we had to take newer team. Here also we took a loan of 55 lakhs from the bank, and there were 20 eye surgeons which were the part of this group. Now after about 3 years down, we could have asked for 2 lakhs each. Now to establish a LASIK center, we just had invested 2 lakhs and the members contributed only 50,000 rupees. So we took a LASIK machine. Now here also the idea was that the individual surgeon will treat his own patient. One thing we observed was that there were no charges paid for referring the patient. And I was challenged in a conference by one of our senior person, the doctor, you cannot survive, but if you survive and repay your loan, I will come to your place, even if it's a smaller place, to see that you are doing well. And I will agree that Dr. Nagpal kept his word when we asked him to come after 7 years. One thing which was possible for us was a strict quality control and high level of rejection of cases, because we did not have economic pressure when you invest so much. That is always distributed amongst all the directors and members. So initially we had a reduced income, so we went on putting up some additional amount which was interest free, and then all latest equipments desirable for best results at that time were procured. Every member, we thought, would need to just bring one patient per month. That was my calculation when we started this. We required 7 years to become loan free. One of the reasons was there was no advertisement, there was no reference charges or cut practice. There was a competition with adjoining districts. When we asked the members to put in just about 50,000, Somebody else advised them, why do you want to put 50,000 or 1 lakh? We are giving you membership free. And on the contrary, we'll pay you extra. Lack of awareness in patients, because in that time, in around 96, 97, patients were not that much aware about the LASIK and the results. And even the ophthalmologist used to say that you do a LASIK and the patient is going to be half blind throughout his life. We needed really to convince the ophthalmologist also. Calculation of one case per patient. Mind well, it's almost 16 years we are running the company, and still that dream has not become practical, because out of the 20 people, still we find that many people don't even bring one patient per month. Because one of the reasons they say is that chair time required for young patients counseling is much more. And today's practice is more cataract oriented. So he says that rather than convincing the patient for LASIK, it's better for me to spend my time in convincing somebody else for cataract. A recurrent cost of gas refill sometimes is never mentioned, but it was astronomical. I remember one in a rainy season, we had some fogginess, and operation theatre started having side leak. We immediately stopped it, and within a week we realized that we required 7 lakh rupees to change the mirrors inside the Lexamer laser machine. Then we had another type of group practice, which was the third venture, which we started later, about another 10 years later. There was one senior surgeon, of course, that time I was being called as senior, and then other associates. I had a major share of investment and control, but others could develop their subspecialties. That means we now have a vitreoretinal surgeon separately, a cornea one, a pediatric ophthalmologist, etc. Now this has less responsibility or burden, and maybe one of them can take over from me the practice when I intend to retire. This was called as Amaya Lasers. We started it at Miraz, which is in Sangli district. A second branch was started in Satara, which is also near Pune, and third was Khed, that is Ratnagiri in Maharashtra. Here we are 10 eye surgeons and again one industrialist. All the diagnostic equipments and super specialty setup like IOL master, fundus camera, green laser, OCTs, YAG laser, everything including high-end vitrectomy, biome, etc. is purchased for this. Then there was an initial investment of 1 crore. The loan was of 45 lakhs, and the contribution was between 1 lakh to 5 lakhs only. That means the director had put in about 5 lakhs and the members had put in about 1 lakhs. The major contribution was mine. Then we started expanding this on our own, and now we have, as I said, 3 branches. The next group practice, because in all these things, one thing was sorely lacking is for a newer surgeon to have an entire setup including OPD as well as indoor, so that if he doesn't want to invest so much, can we give him something better? So we said that those surgeons who already have a practice can continue their practice, and the newer surgeons can directly join this type of group practice. So this we decided to join hands for a new establishment and a well-developed eye hospital which contained all facilities and equipments. This was again a separate entity as a private company, but remember there is one difference in this corporate one, that this is controlled by clinicians, and then the additional facilities for the patients can be given. We have a brand name called as Atharva Netralaya, and we say that this is a corporate hospital with personal touch. That's our logo. We had 2 branches. We started last year only. 2 branches in the city of Pune. One is right at the heart of the city, and one is slightly on the outskirts. So as I said, we call it as a corporate hospital with personal touch because this has been managed by eye surgeons themselves. And who better will understand the patients rather than we ourselves? This again has a neutral place. Individual members can have their own practice, or they may have their consulting room at the same premises. We have all the state-of-the-art machinery. It's an investment of nearly 3 crores. But remember that initial investment required today for any good surgical practice for ophthalmology is around 50 lakhs for a new eye surgeon. The group has advised that one person can invest 1 lakh and utilize all the equipments worth 3 crores, including the best of OPD facilities and all the assistance which is required, and the promoters are putting in 5 lakhs each. Now there are some philanthropic foundations which also came forward, and contributed in the form of equipments for this particular group with only one rider, that those patients who are non-affording, you will not ask them to leave the premises, but will offer them the treatment at least at a subsidized rate, and which we happily accepted. Now this is one good thing. You will realize that we have more than 50 eye surgeons. This was when the slide was prepared. Last week we had our general body meeting, and we added another 9 surgeons. So now we are 59 eye surgeons strong in the city of Pune. The project is of 3 crores, but remember, each and every 59 person has a sense of ownership for everybody. And we say that with ownership comes the responsibility and satisfaction. Additional branches are proposed depending on the demand of group of eye surgeons in that particular area. We don't want people to travel, like the patients don't want to travel from one suburb to the other. The doctors also don't want to travel. So this is ideal for individual practitioners who are unrealistic, invested in large setup, and ideal for young generation who have learned the skills. Now you know that there are a lot of fellowships available, a lot of centers of excellence are available. We acquire the skills, and unfortunately, because the equipments are not there, we tend to just not practice them. So adopt the concept of group practice, my dear fellows, and possibly we will probably come to an end where we can really go back to our noble profession in saying that we give best to our patients. At the same time, we really don't have to have that economic pressure over our heads. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni. Can you please join me on the Any questions or comments from the audience, please?